Welcome to Metcalf Money Moment, the podcast. Unlock financial clarity and confidence with expert insights to achieve your goals. Hosted by Jeb Graham, Ethan Hutchison, and Eric Wymore. Each episode offers decades of combined expertise in wealth management, retirement planning, and more. Join us for practical strategies to inspire your financial journey. Now your hosts.
Welcome to Metcalf Money Moment podcast. My name is Jeb Graham, here with Eric Wymore and Ethan Hutchison. How we doing, guys?
Doing good. Doing well. Good morning.
Good morning. That's right. So a nice morning, nice February morning here where it's a little warmer and it's sunnier than it has been, in years past. So we've actually had a little reprieve, which is nice. So by the time this comes out, it might be freezing again, but right now it's nice. So, but let's talk about today. What we want to talk about is probably the single biggest topic in business and investing right now. I think with all of our clients, when they come in, somehow the discussion usually goes to that, some way or somehow. And that's, as most people can probably guess, is AI or artificial intelligence. So, what's interesting is I think everybody out there, I think people that are working are more, that are still in the working world, or maybe students are probably more exposed to it than maybe retirees are at this point in time. But everyone's heard about AI, but I think most people are trying to figure out how it's going to affect their life, their job, and their investments, right? And I think people probably have a little bit of anxiety about it, excitement about it, and just kind of trying to navigate it. And if you think about it, like when the internet came out, okay, so we've had some big things that have changed kind of the trajectory of technology over the last, 25 to 30 years, one of which is the internet. When that came out, that completely changed how we accessed information, right? We used to go get magazines. We used to go get newspapers and, however we could get that information. And then, in the late 2000s, smartphones came out and that completely changed how we communicated with each other. Big change in the world. And now AI is different because, they're saying, at least right now, what it's changing is it's going to change who does the work in organizations, right? Or how the work gets done in organizations. And, one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this today is that, it's not just a tech trend, right? This is happening in real time. And I think a lot of people maybe think of it as something that's a few years out and it's kind of coming and it's starting to creep in, but really it's happening in real time. Really good article. Sent it to both of you guys yesterday. I think you read it, but it's an article that we're going to put in the show notes here, but it's called Something Big is Happening by Matt Schumer. Talks about kind of how quickly it's actually coming on the scene. I want to give a little example in our organization here, two big things that we're using that have changed, our life a little bit in this organization, one of which is called Jump AI. Jump AI, you've probably been on a Zoom call or you've been in a meeting where somebody has a note taker and they tell you that they're going to be taking notes. Well, what Jump AI does for us is at the end of the meeting, it completely summarizes the meeting. So we don't have to sit around and take notes in meetings anymore, right? It's going to give us a full summary. And then not only that, it's going to ensure that we don't forget anything that was talked about in the meeting. And I don't know about you guys, I was guilty of that a few times, right? Where you're in conversation with the client. You talk about 20 different things and a couple of them, maybe you don't recall afterwards. And so it's eliminating that. And then not only that, it's communicating with our CRM system, our client relations system, it's called Redtail. And basically it's then sending the note to Redtail. It's creating activities. It knows who in our organization does what. It creates activities that we can then basically, edit and make sure that it's correct. And then we can send out all the to-dos. And then we can hit a button and it generates an email to our clients that basically tells them what we talked about, tells them what their to-dos are, what our to-dos are. And so in essence, what that is that's probably an hour of work that is now 10 to 12 minutes of work. Right. And then the other thing we're using is wealth.com. A lot of clients have heard about that, but it's an estate planning tool that in essence, if somebody needs a will, somebody needs a trust, we can use wealth.com and it creates that for them at a fraction of the cost that it used to. And it's a pretty quick and easy system. So what that means, in our world, and we're going to talk about this here in a minute, is that, advisors don't disappear, but the advisor spends less time doing paperwork and more time actually giving advice, right? And I think that's what it's going to do in our business. So and we'll say this, and I think Eric's going to reiterate this a little later, is that AI isn't necessarily replacing professionals per se. It's replacing some of the tasks that professionals are having to do. So what we're going to do is break down a couple of things. As Ethan's going to talk about AI and who are the big players. It's funny because I think everyone's heard of Chat GPT, right? And it's almost become synonymous with AI, kind of like a Kleenex is to a tissue. It's like the brand that people think of in AI. And we're going to talk, there's a lot more than just Chat GPT going on. There's a lot of different players and a lot of companies that are involved. And then Eric's going to talk about how it is affecting, markets and portfolios, how people are managing money. And then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about maybe the next 3 to 5 years in the next decade. What are some of the big changes that potentially we could see? But first, let's talk about who are these companies, Ethan, and who's kind of changing this landscape.
Yeah. Good. It's a good segue because, man, the Kleenex tissue reference, Jeb, that was A+. That was a great little.
I spent a lot of time on that.
But yeah, so the Kleenex tissue one was excellent. So I'm going to use something similar. We're going to take the food pyramid, we're going to turn that upside down, and we're going to kind of talk about who the key players are, and then funneling that down into the key applications of how AI is used today, and probably how it's going to be used for the rest of our lives. So when you think about AI, ignore Chat GPT for a minute. We're going to kind of go back to the builders of AI. Who are the brains and who's building the actual infrastructure and foundation? So companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google DeepMind, Meta, these are large companies that build all of the ecosystem internally within AI, talking about coding, how smart the systems are, the systems that learn off of themselves. So when AI makes a mistake, these companies go in and create code that can fix that mistake. So in the future, they never make that mistake again. So it's interesting because you look at OpenAI and some of the capital expenditure with these companies and how much they're actually spending to develop this is astronomical. I'm talking, billions of dollars per quarter that gets sunk into just development and coding and design of some of these systems. The performance gains are slowing right now, and there's more refining that's occurring, efficiency, distribution channels, and how do you monetize AI? How can you bring AI into an organization and explain its value to the stakeholders? That's a really big thing that we're seeing as kind of the model builders expand their trajectory, if you will. The second layer that we're going to talk about is the actual infrastructure and cloud. So all of the artificial intelligence that's out there, it's got to be stored somewhere. And so these data centers or the cloud are a really big topic of conversation right now. So you look at Nvidia, Microsoft, Amazon, they're key players in, everyone knows you're talking about chips and semiconductors and all that stuff that help AI kind of evolve because you need that power that's there. But what do these companies actually do? So Nvidia is the one, they build the chips. They're the ones that essentially put the brains in these computers that allow AI to act as efficiently as it does. Microsoft and Amazon, they kind of rent some of that computing power from these large data centers and utilize that to build and expand their internal systems as well. Nvidia has had extraordinary pricing power due to computer scarcity. So for a long time, Nvidia was kind of the main player in the system. And everyone, if I'm saying Nvidia, you know who I'm talking about. They're one of the largest tech companies in the world globally. So they're definitely someone to pay attention to. And then cloud providers benefit regardless of what model wins. So when you look at Nvidia, Microsoft, and those companies, they're always going to benefit from AI because they've developed that foundation, and other companies that are out there are going to use their systems to kind of expand upon. So they're a really good sector in that market. And then we're an open capitalistic society, right? So there's always going to be competition that's floating into the system, and kind of where does that drive? How do you say it? Where does that drive and expand AI moving forward? So you've got smaller companies out there like AMD. I know everyone's probably heard of Intel. They still make chips. It's probably in your laptop right now. And then Broadcom, and they're kind of coming into the space, and they're not direct competitors quite yet, but they're inching their way closer to being that Nvidia competitor and seeing how they can inch other big, large companies out of the market. And then you've got the application layer, which is kind of where you're probably going, if you're listening to this podcast, this is what you're going to be most used to hearing about. So you've got Adobe, Salesforce, Palantir, ServiceNow. When I think of Adobe, that's putting something into a PDF. And how do we streamline designing PDFs and fillable PDFs and things like that? And Adobe brings in all this foundational technology that's already been built by the companies we talked about before, and then throws it into their organization to make their organization more efficient. Just like Jeb was talking about, when we use Jump AI, we didn't develop that software. We're utilizing that, bringing that into our organization and making our organization more efficient. If you're in any sort of sales role or any sort of medical device sales role or anything like that, you're probably using AI to work on touch points and business development and streamlining those efficiencies as well. So you're kind of slowly funneling things down. And then what we're about to talk about, which is the fifth layer, is the capital and scale giants. So Apple, Google, Tesla, the big companies that everyone talks about, the Mag 7, if you will, that you've probably heard about. These companies are the ones that are really embedding all of this AI talk into their hardware, their software, the user experience. So you look at Apple, who designed, do they do the infrared or the VR goggles and all that stuff? So they're utilizing the AI technology inside of their hardware that ultimately gets sold to the end user, which would be us as consumers. So not only is, ChatGPT a big part of AI and where it's going, but taking that same foundation and implementing that into organizations so that the end user has benefit, that's really where, these key players kind of funnel down into these massive organizations, all the way down to us typing in a question into ChatGPT. So there's a lot of players. It's not just a search engine.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's changing the whole world right now. And it's not, as you mentioned earlier, it's not a future story. AI is not a future story. It's today. It's happening right now. It's not theoretical anymore. And I know an analogy that I heard, a little while back about, this is more of like a gold rush, and the first few companies that you want to own during the gold rush is the pickaxe and the shovel makers. And that's exactly the companies you just described there, Ethan. Is those are the companies that are, got, their shovels in the ground, finding the stuff, making the stuff, creating the stuff. And as the last several quarters and years have, even started to develop, you're starting to see the shift move on into the infrastructure. So rather than just the pickaxe and the shovel makers, now you're starting to see the hotel type companies, of this gold rush boom, so to speak, carrying on this analogy. And all of a sudden you got restaurants being made, roads being made, all the different types of hospitals being made. And you're seeing that expand into those industries inside the market, or inside the price of the companies. And really it's a better margin story, right? I mean, two companies that come to mind when you think of better margins is Walmart and Costco, right? I mean, those two companies are absolutely using AI to help forecast their demands, help with their inventory predictions, help with their pricing optimization. And, Walmart, again, these are not recommendations on buying or selling these stocks, but, these are just observations we've had over the last few months. As they live in the margins, right? They run on really thin margins. And if they're able to help those margins out, those companies are going to do a lot better. I think you're starting to see AI, in the marketplaces help out, like you mentioned, the healthcare industry. You're processing claims, they're becoming automated. There's preventative care analytics that's being used. There's fraud detection, massive amounts of fraud that is being able to help these companies save, millions and billions of dollars. They're able to, do some prediction within General Electric type of a company, where they're able to predict their maintenance on their jet engines, which leads to less breakdowns, which leads to less downtime for consumers. I mean, it's an amazing things that they're able to do. And even in the logistics space, where your UPS and FedEx type companies, where they're able to deliver packages faster, less miles driven, less fuel used, all leads to the bottom line. That's what you're starting to see, kind of that next step. So the hyperscalers moved first. Now you're starting to see the fruits of their labor being passed on to some of the other companies. And it's it's been an amazing cycle so far. And I think, some other areas where, Jeb, you mentioned earlier, the research, the data, the amount of time it takes to gather data, a project that would take 80 hours in the investment world of researching stocks, researching, other types of investments might take 80 to 120 hours of a project can be done in minutes. And now it's not really a focus on, you know, researching the data and gathering the data. It's analyzing the data, and so much more time is spent on analyzing the actual data that they gather to help them make better decisions for investing, clients' money. So it's unique, it's different. It's just moving a lot faster, a lot more information, a lot faster. But as always, there's a couple things that AI is not going to change, right? It's not going to change market volatility, right? We're still going to have ups and downs in the market. There's no doubt about it. Couple of other things that the AI is not going to do. It's not going to avoid recessions. We're still going to have economic recessions at times. We're still going to have a few bear markets in the stock market at times. AI is not going to change investor emotions. There's always going to be a little bit of that goes around where investors make some decisions based upon their emotions. I think before, a couple things that you want to make sure that you are avoiding, I think you always want to make sure that you're avoiding chasing these hype, chasing some of these stocks and the hype on some of these high players, or the AI hype stocks. You want to make sure you avoid chasing those. You also want to make sure that you are making concentrated type investments. There's going to be some winners and losers out there. This is not a prediction, but just what happens. There'll definitely be some companies that do really, really well in the future. And then there's going to be some that are going to struggle. So you just want to make sure that you avoid concentration. I think what you want to focus on is maintaining your diversification, right? You're going to want to have your large growth stocks that own some of those hyperscalers that you mentioned, Ethan. You're going to want to own some value stocks. You're going to want to own some international, some emerging markets, some small cap and mid cap, and fixed income as well. Maintain that diversification, maintain that long-term investment strategy, and stay disciplined to the financial plan that you set forth with your financial advisor. And just try not to speculate. It's the AI. It's here. It's not in the future. It's here. There's definitely ways to take advantage of it. But just maintain that long-term investment approach, and you'll be way better off.
For sure. Well, and so super good info there on just markets. And I do think when we have clients coming in, that a lot of it, people want to make sure that they're involved in that, right? That they're involved in what's going on in AI. And what I'll tell anybody out there is if you're just broadly invested in the S&P 500, you are very invested in it, right? And we just talked about the Mag 7. The Mag 7 makes up, close to 50% of the S&P 500 index weighting now. So anyway, there's you don't necessarily have to go out there and find some company to get into it. If you're a broad market investor, you're getting a fair amount of exposure to it right now, which is good as well. And so we've talked about AI, and I think more importantly than kind of the past that we've just talked about is, who are the players and all that. I don't know about more importantly, but as important is what does this mean, for the future? Obviously we don't predict the future, but we will see some changes here over the next probably, 1 to 3 years, and then also 3 to 5 years and so on and so forth. And so, when we looked at that, and by the way, there's two kind of ways that people are looking at it. There's some people that think that this is going to come in and it's going to change everything very quickly. And then there's others that think that maybe it's kind of more of a slow drip, or somewhere in between there, not necessarily a slow drip, but there's certain things that change quick, but certain things might take a little bit longer to actually transpire over time. And if you think about that, electricity, that took decades. The internet took about 20 years to hit productivity numbers. And then, AI is kind of entering that phase of like, how long is this going to take? What does this mean? And what all is going to change? So, what I would say in the next 3 to 5 years, and this is just general thought processes, we probably aren't going to see robots replacing all the jobs overnight, right? But what we are going to see is going to be quieter, but it's also going to be economically impactful and humongous. And that's that workers and companies are going to become dramatically more productive over that time frame. So if you think about it, accountants, maybe it takes them 6 hours to do a complex tax return right now that's going to take 1 or 2 hours here this year or next year. Programmers build software twice as fast. Doctors diagnose faster. Advisors hopefully can analyze faster, kind of like what Eric was talking about a minute ago, is that stock research as opposed to, a person having to go through a multitude of different, data points. It's this thing, AI can do it, in a fraction of the time. So that's one of the things that matters. And I also think this is another, whether it's a misconception, is a lot of people think that, if to participate in the AI boom, you've got to own AI stocks. And the reality is, AI is going to make everything more efficient. So it's gonna increase bottom lines in companies in healthcare, insurance, manufacturing, logistics, finance. It's not just the AI companies that are going to benefit from it. It's the companies, like us, like any other one, that's starting to adopt AI and use it in their day to day. And then when you think about the midterm, the 5 to 10 years, everyone's talked about AI assistance. I'm going to be completely honest. I don't fully understand exactly how that works or what it means now, but they're saying, 5 to 10 years from now, I could have an AI assistant that's talking to somebody else's AI assistant, and I'm never actually having the conversation with that human being, which sounds, obscure at this point in time, but that's kind of, what people are talking about. But then what they're saying is that, when you look at that 5 to 10, it's not just, because I do think a lot of people use AI right now, kind of like a search engine, right? They're just trying to get information. It's better information than what they used to get from Google. They can be more specific in that information, but they're saying in that 5 to 10 year time frame that not only are we going to be increasing and accessing information, but it's going to be, doing the workflows, and not only doing the workflows, but creating the workflows. Meaning, right now when we look at Jump AI, it's identifying workflows, but it's not necessarily creating the work per se, if you will. So I think that's where they're saying that could go, down the road. And to be honest with you, I think us, like everybody else, we're also going to have to kind of see it to believe it and to understand it. Right. And as that transpires, I think it could change a lot of things. And then, lastly, we talked about what are the risks of AI? Cause I think a lot of people are, they've watched Terminator. We've all seen Terminator, and, there is a little bit of a scary aspect in that regard. But when you really look about kind of real time risks right now is, and I think Eric hit on this a little bit earlier, is hype cycles in stocks, right? Is there an AI bubble right now, or is there going to be an AI bubble? We don't know that for sure until we know that. But, you can certainly see this being one of those times where companies become overvalued based on speculation of the future. And so that's one risk. And then you have companies overspending on AI. We just saw this in this last earnings cycle, as we had, I think it was Amazon and Microsoft. Their stock price went down, and it was based on the fact that Wall Street thought they were overspending. Basically, too much of their budget was allocated toward AI. Regulation. I think because AI is in the infancy stages, so is the regulatory environment there. So we don't know exactly what that looks like down the road. But like, you think about just social media in general over the last 10, 15 years. It took a while for regulators to get in there and really figure out what was going on and what needed to be regulated. And I would expect that cycle to happen for AI over the coming years as well. And then, the one that everybody talks about, and it's hard to disagree with it, is you are going to have some job disruptions in certain industries, and which workers are going to be affected. I think for sure, like in our business, when we're just talking about Jump AI, I keep relating stuff to our business, but there's certain things that Jump AI can do that now we don't need a human being for, right? And so I think every industry, every business is going to do that. So there's going to be job displacement. And the question is, what creates the new jobs? Because I would guess that there's going to be some new jobs created out of it as well. And so, but that's kind of, AI in a nutshell. And we don't proclaim to be AI experts by any, we're not tech experts, but I will say that it's here, and it's starting to change things. And I think the earlier companies adopt it and embrace it, probably the more of a competitive edge that they'll have. And we'll see that transpire here over the coming years. So anything else?
Or days.
Any final thoughts, guys?
No, I'm excited. I mean, You guys can probably attest to this too. I don't go a day without hearing about it, talking about it, thinking about it. It gets brought up in conversations and passing. So it's the comment you keep making, Jeb, is it's here, and I think that's definitely something to not ignore.
Yep, for sure. Absolutely. Well, very good. Anything else, Eric?
No, I just say again, it's I think there's a quote that I read, the financial advisor isn't going away, but the financial advisor that doesn't use AI is going to go away.
That's right. That's right. And you can probably say that about a lot of industries, right? Like
absolutely.
Right. The doctor's not going away, but the one that doesn't adopt it might have some challenges. And so it'll be interesting. But, well, guys, thank you. And this is Metcalf Money Moment signing off.
Thanks for tuning in to Metcalf Money Moment, the podcast. We hope today's episode provided valuable insights to help you unlock financial clarity, confidence, and peace of mind. For more expert advice and resources, visit metcalfpartners.com. Until next time, make every money moment count.
Jeb Graham, Ethan Hutchison, and Eric Wymore are registered representatives with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through WCG Wealth Advisors, a registered investment advisor. WCG Wealth Advisors and Metcalf Partners Wealth Management are separate entities from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly.